Okay, so let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, there were two women walking down a country road. When along in the middle of the road, they came across a frog. And the frog looked up and said, "Kiss me, and I'll turn into a rich and handsome prince." Oops, wrong prince. Rich and handsome prince. At which point, the first woman picked up the frog and put it into her purse. And off down the road they went to her house. When they got to her house, she took the frog out and put it into a box and put the box up on a shelf. Every day for the next week, she would take the frog out of the box, put it on the table, and the frog would look up and say, "Kiss me. I'll turn to a rich and handsome prince." At which point she put it back into the box. This went on for a number of weeks. When finally her friend came over and said, "Look, just kiss the frog, and he'll turn to a rich and handsome prince, and you'll be happy for the rest of your life." At which point the first woman said, "You've got to be kidding. A talking frog is worth more than a rich and handsome prince any day." So the narrative is a story about a frog, and of course there's a moral at the end that a talking frog is worth more than any man or prince or money that you can find. So that's why I call this little session a storytelling and talking frog. And there's three things I want you to remember. As an instructional designer, as a trainer, as an instructor, as a presenter, a facilitator, whatever position or role you have in helping people learn, storytelling should always be a well thought out and planned integral part of your instructional plan or of your instructional design. So three things that you need to think about when creating a story or designing a story or writing a story or telling a story is, number one, how can you deliver an opening that generates excitement, that really gets people excited and generates enthusiasm and some anticipation in your learners. Number two, how can you capture your participants' attention? How do you get their attention and emphasize key points that you want them to pay attention to through that story? And number three, how can you tell stories that lead your audience to want to do things new, to want to try new ideas or explore new ideas? And cognitive scientists have actually looked at the brain when people tell stories. And although we typically think of storytelling like this woman, where we're at a storytelling convention and somebody's telling this fabulous story up on the stage, and it's very entertaining and it's very interesting, but scientists said, well, let's take a look a little closer and watch the brain as people are listening to stories. So when they're listening to a good story, a good narrative, they found that certain parts of the brain lit up and started glowing and flashing and working whenever people were listening to a great story. Actually, the parts of the brain that lit up were the same parts that light up when you're experiencing something in the story. So it was just like, it was as if the person was really there. So the same parts of the brain that light up when you actually physically experience something were lighting up when you heard a story about that same event. So they thought this is a pretty fascinating thing. Of course, it's kind of like eating a sandwich. All eating food, all the experiences and the excitement and the neurons that fire off when you eat happen when you eat or when you listen to stories. So stories, they found, were actually ways to get people to think, to get people to be creative, to stimulate analytical thinking through this process of telling a good story. So the first thing you have to do in telling a good story is grabbing people's attention. That's the first element in a good story and a good narrative, is getting people's attention. So let me just ask you, since I'm sure some of you are good storytellers out there, what are some ways you can grab your learner's attention when you're telling a story or designing a story, incorporating a story into a learning event, a learning experience? Humor. Okay. Iteration. What do you mean by iterations, Josh? Why don't you jump on the microphone? Make it funny or dramatic. Shock. Good. Start with videos. Okay, interactions. Okay. Have an interaction with the person as you're telling the story. What I'm trying to do now, having interaction. Okay, very good. So some good ideas, and so obviously you're good storytellers. One thing you can do is get them curious. Make people curious. Make your listeners curious to make them want to hear more, so they're going to pay a little more attention. Here's one way you can do that. You can do something with a little bit of drama, something with a little dramatic flair. For example, you can start your story by saying, in a few minutes, Brad Pitt is going to walk through your door and stand next to your desk and ask you to be in his movie. So what are you going to say to him? Or you could say, under one of your seats is a prize worth thousands of dollars. And so if you listen to my presentation, or if you listen to the lesson, at the end of the lesson, I'm going to ask you some key questions, and whoever answers the questions wins the prize. Of course, all this is intended to get them to pay attention, to listen, because it's a little more dramatic and they're getting a little more curious. You can also use shock. I think, who was it? Tarika had mentioned a shock factor. Something that's going to startle people just a little bit. So you could say something like, 1 out of 3 people here today are going to fail this class or fail to get promoted unless they do the following. Or in the next 60 seconds, 10 people will quit your company, or 10 people will die from a disease because of poor service or because of poor health care if we don't do something, or if you don't do something. The purpose being to create a little bit of a dramatic shock type of factor, giving them some numbers or something that's vivid that's going to get people to pay attention. So far, what do you think? If I was doing something in the process of instructional design, something we tend to neglect is doing some in-process or formative assessment. So if you look in the upper left-hand corner, there is a little pen. And if you click that pen, you can find a little marker where you can come here and you can put marks on the whiteboard. Y'all see that? So tell me right now, what is your reaction? How would you evaluate our session so far? Does everybody, can you all find the little pen up in the upper left-hand corner? It says annotation if you hover over it.
Yeah, it's weird, but it's not doing anything when I do it.
So you're not getting a little menu on the left-hand side?
I am, but it's all grayed out.
Okay.
I was going to do a little smiley face with the glasses.
Let me see. Yeah, okay. I'm going to go ahead and assign all privileges. So let's try it again. Still not working. There it goes. Now you're able to do it. Good. So as Josh mentioned earlier, trying to get some interaction while you're telling your story. You can stop your story, because what I'm actually doing is narrating a story to you about giving you a presentation. So you can always stop and just have people interact with you, have them give you an assessment or tell you what's going to happen next in the story. All right, we're going to take a little brain break. Those of you who have a microphone, go ahead and get on the microphone. Go ahead and unmute for just a minute.
Okay.
Okay, everybody there who wants to participate, I want you to repeat after me. Okay, so everybody get on unmute and repeat after me. Pop.
Everybody get off there and unmute after me.
Get on your microphone. No, don't repeat.
I'm just doing what you said.
There's always somebody that's literal out there. Okay, repeat after me. Pop.
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 Pop, pop.
Pop, pop.
Pop, pop, pop.
Pop, pop, pop.
Pop, 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 pop.
Pop, 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 pop.
What do you do at a green light?
You stop. Oh!
Oh, what are you doing?
Oh, let's get those emoticons up there again.
There you go. You do at a green light. Okay. Everybody try this one. Spell the word out loud. Spell the word silk.
S-I-L-K.
What do cows drink?
Milk.
No.
Oh.
No, cows
Water.
drink water. Okay, I'm gonna give you one more chance. Otherwise, I'm gonna think you're all just sleeping on me. The word coast.
C-O-A-S-T.
What do you put in a toaster?
Bread.
Good. Now you're getting smart. All right, good. That was your brain break. Now we're back to the session. Okay. Embodied learning. Josh mentioned interacting, helping people interact in the story, and you can do that a number of ways. But scientists have found that our bodies, our experiences are grounded in physical action, physical experiences, and that if we embody our learning, we can be more effective learners. So what that effectively means is, when we're designing instruction, when we're designing a learning experience, we want to find ways to people to physically, I'm not talking about just sitting back and answering questions, but physically with their bodies get involved in the learning process in some way that will help them to embody what they're learning, to help them connect the learning to physical activity. So let me give you some examples of how this, well, let me ask you for examples of how you could embody learning. How could you get people involved in the learning process, not just cognitively, but also physically, so they're doing it at the same time?
This is Tom.
Okay.
One of the things that I do with my trainees is, and I tell them, like, because I do hotel software, and I'm like, okay, I want you to pair up with somebody else. And like, if I'm teaching, for example, like check-ins, I want you to tell me some of the check-in scenarios that you've had at other hotels that you worked in, like whether it was a group or individuals or a VIP, like give me different scenarios that you've had before and let's talk about them. And then I'm going to tell you how those are going to relate to how you're going to do it now.
Okay. And how is that getting them physically, getting their bodies involved in the process of learning?
Because they have to talk with one another and they're actually like writing down examples. So like they're physically writing and they're talking to one another.
Okay, so the writing part, I would say, yeah, that gets them physically doing something that's going to embody the learning in the act of writing.
Okay.
Anybody else? Give me some other examples. I want to truly embody people's make the physical experience part of the learning experience.
Well, I mean, coaching-wise, we do a lot. I mean, we do all kinds of activities, sometimes even just to stimulate the brain or get things going, even like a tag game, even with adults, to kind of get them to relax, kind of laugh, have fun.
Okay.
And then we talk about the fact that it's, now they're actually breathing hard. It's like, look, we had fun and we got tired at the same time, and we don't work on agility, blah, blah, blah.
Nia, what do you have to share?
I was just going to say, so when I am actually working with our trainees for flight attendants, we actually have for them to actually get in the water and, see how the life vests work and how difficult it really is to inflate, the rafts and pretty much how to survive if there was a water landing. So is that kind of like the experience that you're referring to?
Sure. So they're actually in the rafts, or they're actually physically doing things as you're explaining the learning.
Right. They're like huddling in the small groups to keep, they're doing all
right,
that stuff.
Right. That's exactly right. That's exactly what I'm thinking about. So, go ahead, Larry.
Well, I was going to say in my site visit, got to talk to and interact with the disruptive behavior instruction there at the VA hospital here in Omaha, and part of that training is relies very heavily on not only experiences of other people, but also when they have the containment part exercise that they're trying to keep an angry patient from either harming themselves or harming others, that they actually go through takedown processes and how to manage the outbursts. So there's a lot of one-on-one training and hands-on training for that. So it gets everybody really involved.
Good. Okay. So we're actually talking about the physical activity of getting people involved in the learning. And we remember, go back to our learning styles or our learning preferences. We did in an earlier collaborate. Some of the activities that we talked about doing, particularly for accommodators, they like to be hands-on. They like to have a lot of excitement, a lot of risk, a lot of movement. So when you're thinking about how people learn in different quadrants, how can we get people up that have these different learning preferences? Thinking about what kind of physical things can we do. The accommodators are easy, but for the rest, for example, if you're a diverger type of learning, you like cooperative, interactive exercises, we can actually have people do things, and I'm going to show you some examples in just a minute, that would work for any one of these. And this is one activity we do that gets people and do some embodied learning. Because we go back to those learning preferences and have students, and this is when we're in a face-to-face class, we break the groups up based on the learning preference. So we identify their learning preference or their learning, their dominant learning style, or not learning style, but learning preference. And then we have them get together and come up with a plan for teaching the class how to make a paper airplane. Then they come back to the class and they actually, as a group, they teach or give an instruction or give a little lesson on how to make a paper airplane. And for each group, they will approach it differently. Divergers who are more reflective, they're very concerned to make sure everybody's included and everybody's doing well and nobody's having a problem struggling. They make sure everybody has paper and everybody has a kind of somebody over the shoulder to help them. Assimilators get very involved and usually end up with a very long, drawn-out, complicated process they write up on the board. Convergers are very strict and want everybody to follow their rules. But in the process of learning about learning preferences, we have people actually learn to make paper airplanes, which reflects you teach the way you learn, but it also gets people involved in the process of physically making a paper airplane that, as you can see, they subsequently end up flying. Another way you can do it is with pipe cleaners. It's also called chenille stems for those of you who are craft people. For those of you who are old timers, you old school, you'll recognize them as pipe cleaners. But what I do, I bring pipe cleaners, bags of pipe cleaners to every class, and I pass them on and put them on the desk, and I ask people to go ahead and just play with them. Just do whatever comes to your mind, make them into whatever you want. So during the process of the lesson that we're talking about, they will make figures or create objects or things that help them reflect what we're talking about. For example, these are the kind of things that they might come up with as we're doing discussions. And when one class we were talking about was during a holiday season, we were talking about how special, significant days and holidays and events during the year, it has to do with depression and psychological issues dealing with learning. This is in my adult learner class. They created some trees. And the bottom left hand, you can see somebody creating a little figure. And this is actually the person who created this was a blonde woman, and she was walking. This is a shape of her walking her dog. Some of the other things they make, well, no, I don't have any more. So that's just one other thing you can do is to have people use devices to occupy their hands and occupy their minds while they're learning and create objects that can somehow have a connection to what you're learning. Of course, you can't do it with every lesson or with every topic, but it's something you can do at different times. Another thing I do is have people randomly, I've had them come up. Anybody heard of sketch notes? Has anybody heard of this as a instructional form? Yeah, you probably should raise your hands, Trent. I'm having trouble following the, for some reason I can't follow the chat. Yeah, Keela was talking about exercise, body movement, breathing techniques, dancing. I'm glad you brought up dancing. Bethany mentioned building towers to show how cooperative works teams. Okay, Pictionary, whiteboard concept maps, artwork, yoga, role play, exercises. Good. These are all good ideas. So sketch notes, you might have seen this at a presentation where somebody is up at a board as the speaker is talking, and the person at the board is actually sketching out the presentation in a pictorial form with some text and some pictures. This is just one example of it. Well, I actually have students come up to the front, and I'll get 3 or 4 students and have them become my sketch note artists. And so as I'm talking or we're discussing the lecture or the lesson, I'll have them come up and sketch out whatever comes to their mind in a pictorial form. So they're actually drawing and creating these pictorials in front of the class while we're actually having a discussion. And this is a sketch note example of what somebody did when we were talking about Kolb's learning preferences or learning styles. And this is what they came up with as a pictorial. So you can see that for each different quadrant, they had a computer or a peace symbol or somebody on a bike and a danger sign. So you can see this was their take on the discussion. We did another session when we were talking about generational differences. No, I can't remember what was this one about. Oh, this is about doing learning contracts. This is bringing together a lot of different topics that we've been discussing when we went on to the next lesson. But in the process of creating your sketch notes or your little cartoons or whatever artistic form you wanted to use, this is embodied learning because you're making a connection with the body and with the learning. Who was it mentioned? Was it Keela? You mentioned dancing. Let me see if I can pull this up. We're just about finished here, but I want to share this with you. Let's see. Well, not working the right way. Are you all still there? Okay, there we go.
Yes.
Well, I wasn't able to get that to come up the way I wanted to. I wanted to show you a picture, but we actually did this. We actually get people up and actually have dance classes, and we dance during the lesson. I wanted to show you one we did at a big conference. But dance is a way of doing embodied learning. You can also use storyboarding and have your students create storyboards. For those of you who are not familiar with storyboards, it's simply something like you do when you think of cartoons. You have them visually create a story that reflects the lesson. So if we're doing a lesson about left brain, right brain thinking, or we're doing a lesson about instructional design, how to create learning objectives, or how to do a Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of evaluation or 5 levels of evaluation, you would have them create a picture that reflects the story that we're talking about or reflects the lesson we're talking about. And in this process of creating their storyboard, they would write out pictures of what they would imagine the story would look like with little scenes down below it. Has anybody ever seen anything like this? These are just ways you can. Yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Sorry, I should have raised my hand.
No, that's okay.
No, I'll just say, yeah, I've seen storyboards a lot.
Okay. Storyboards are something that you can actually use in creating your stories for a lesson, but you can also have your students use storyboards. It takes a little learning on your part and a little instruction on their part to get them to understand how they work. But in the process of creating the storyboards and creating these, the scene, and it can be stick figures, it doesn't have to be anything complicated, but creating the scene, creating the action, what dialogue would be going on, it's kind of like creating a cartoon strip. It's kind of like cartoon panels. And you can get as fancy as you want and have an ultimate product that they can use to create a visual story using Movie Maker or using some kind of a software tool. But again, as part of embodied learning is simply getting people to physically be involved in the learning process. Okay. So the final piece tonight then, so we created that, we try to get people's attention, try to create something exciting, create some anticipation. There's different ways that we can do that and get people to interact through embodied learning, getting people physically involved in the learning. And then, of course, the final thing, you want to create a lasting image, so when you walk away, people have this lasting image. If you remember from the video clip, the last thing he talked about was what? The last thing he talked about was not having a frenetic mind. He left you with the image of Grand Central Station, and the final image was somebody lying in a field relaxing. And the essence being that you need to relax, unplug, get away from all the stresses and all the action and the busyness of life, and have time to let your tortoise mind think to help you solve problems. So that was his lasting image, and here's mine. Remember the frog we talked about at the beginning of the night? Well, that frog got kind of bored just asking the woman to kiss him and turn into a handsome frog. So finally one day he said, look, I'm tired of this. I'm going to head out to Los Angeles and find my fortune. So he jumped on his bike and he headed out to Hollywood. And when he got out there, he met a couple of influential people that you might recognize. And those influential people helped him to ultimately become a star on TV. And now you know the rest of the story. Remember this story? Okay. So that's it for tonight. Just a little short session about storytelling. I would encourage you all to look into it and to think about it during instructional design. Get away from the simple lecture, lesson, show them a video, show them a PowerPoint, have them do some discussion, and get into creating stories that span the lessons that you're teaching, even spanning from class to class or period to period, where you can actually start a story at the beginning of the first class, and you can bring elements into each class so that people look forward to that story. Of course, you want the story to always be related back to the learning. We don't want to tell a story just for the sake of storytelling. But that's the whole point of talking about this narrative. We learn by good narrative storytelling. It lights up the brain, it gets people engaged, and it can help them to reinforce their learning. So if there's nothing else tonight, anybody have any questions, concerns, complaints? Now's the time to voice them. If not, that's it for tonight.